Good evening, beautiful people of planet Earth and all other interdimensional entities. In fact, all sentient beings and all our relations across the multiverse, all life forms of sentience and breath and hope and love and joy and peace and comfort and ease and life force, I guess. Let's not forget the life force. So I've poured myself a Jack Daniels and Coke in honour of my 60th revolution around this astonishingly blue planet that seethes, is that the word? Thrives with life in millions of forms, and it's astonishing and it's miraculous, and I'm grateful and equally astonished to be still here. So l'chaim to that. Happy birthday. And the sun has set, so it will also be the first Seder of Passover, although I'm pretty sure Jack Daniels being made from grain is probably chometz, but I'm not celebrating Passover in the traditional way yet again, finding myself without a congregation and now without my other tribe. Oh, smallest violin, but it is what it is. Happy 60th birthday to Tanya, because, you know, I've pulled myself through yet another set of circumstances that weren't all that nice, and I'm soldiering on as per normal. And so to my fellow Jewish brethren and sororities, Chag Sameach Pesach, hope you have a good celebration and a memory of freedom from enslavement and oppression. The same ancient tropes that existed thousands of years ago in Egypt still exist today in our modern contemporary society. So there is that. Anyway, had a beautiful day both yesterday and today. Yesterday my friend Jared took me out for lunch, and then we went shopping at a second-hand shop and had a good look around, and spent some more time back at my place eating cake and luxuriating. And then today my beautiful Lynn came to spend the day with me, although today the weather went a bit sour and there were storms and lots of rain and she wasn't feeling all that well. So it was a little bit disappointing for her, because she wanted to celebrate with me. She came out even though she felt unwell, and such is her deep love for me. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you she brought me this beautiful little cake that had strawberry mousse and vanilla and ginger biscuit base. Oh, it was delicious. So I really have been spoilt by my friends, and I'm very grateful and happy. And so now and while I'm still kind of musing about what my next decade might be like on planet Earth with all the immense changes all around us, I thought I'll just have a little bit of a tipple and continue reading from Great Mysteries of the Modern World. And we're up to the chapter Church Walls Were Haunted by Faces of the Dead, Dean Liddell and his wife. I'm not sure if that's going to be a long chapter or a short chapter, because some of them are remarkably short. It's only a few pages long, so I'll probably read a couple of chapters in that case. Anyway. No, that would have been in former memories. All right, and I was just thinking if I should read something that I wrote myself, but it would have been already read and put in my journal. 12 months of journal entries, so I don't have to worry about that. All right, let us begin with the story. 25 years after he died, the face of Dean Henry Liddell inexplicably appeared in mould on a wall of Christ Church, Oxford, which is in England. This bizarre event created such intense public interest that after 3 years, embarrassed church authorities finally summoned resolution enough to have the image scrubbed off. Within days, however, the Dean's likeness re-emerged. When it was removed again, an image of his deceased wife appeared in its place. These occurrences were not unique. For centuries, portraits of people long buried have spontaneously appeared, seemingly without an artist's intervention, on the walls, windows and floors of churches and private dwellings. In 1971, an inquiry into one face-crowded cottage in Spain revealed that it had been built over an ancient graveyard. What causes such pictures slowly to well up from stone, cement and plaster? Investigators can find no answer. On 17th of July 1923, London's Daily Express published an unusual report under the headline, Face of Dead Dean. The article's posthumous subject was the famed cleric Dr. Henry Liddell, 1811 to 1898. My goodness. He was 87 when he died. Yes, that's correct. Dean of Christ Church, Oxford, and father of Alice Liddell, the inspiration for Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. In mould on the wall of the church's south aisle, a perfect representation of Dr. Liddell's face had gradually appeared over a period of several months. See photographs. Right, there are these photographs, which I wish to see. Not here. What good is saying see photographs when they're not here? Rather annoying, isn't it? Oh no, here they are. What page are we on? 138. Right. The first photograph says, former Dean of Christ Church Henry Liddell. He is principally remembered today for being the father of his famous daughter Alice and for an extraordinary occurrence after his death. See opposite. And here he is. Here's little Alice, and there he is appearing in mould. She looks like there's another little face in front of him there as well. Of some kind, looks like a child there too. Interesting. Image in mould In 1923, a perfect profile of Dean Liddell bloomed in mould on a wall of Christchurch Cathedral between two plaques. When authorities had scrubbed it away, the face of the Dean's wife, Lorena, also deceased, gradually appeared in its place. Neither university nor cathedral investigators could find any explanation. Dream Child, Lewis Carroll's photograph of Alice Pleasance Liddell, inspiration for his classic books Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I'll just show you. There's quite a few allegations made that he had a bit of a unnatural obsession for that little girl, which wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, this photo, Graveyard Face. In 1971, images of human faces began to appear on the kitchen floor of a cottage in Belmez, Spain. Police sealed the building against possible hoaxes, with the faces, many of them seemingly troubled, continued to surface by the thousand. Gosh. Scientists could discover no cause for the phenomenon. Archaeologists established that the cottage was built over an ancient cemetery. Right, so let's have a look. This one's a bit harrowing looking. Looks like they're obviously in some kind of distress. Thousands of faces like that appearing would be a bit freaky, to say the least. Here's a photo of that shining cross that I read to you about a few days ago, 5 days ago. That appeared 11 years after his death and continues to glow, apparently to this day. Oh no, the light shone for 60 years. It's quite an intense glow, isn't it, for a cross glowing to appear above a headstone. Here's a photo of that must be a story that's coming up later, but a photo of Joseph Stalin, dead. Secretly murdered, ? Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin lies in state at the flower-decked Kremlin in 1953. Captive Soviet media mourned the tyrant's loss, calling him the father of the nation. But in 1956, Nikita Khrushchev revealed that Stalin had in fact been responsible for the murder of 43 million Russians. Khrushchev, some distinguished historians believe, failed to disclose the rest of the story, namely that he and 3 colleagues, frightened by Stalin's descent into madness, killed him with rat poison, which seems quite reasonable, since he was murdering millions and millions of his own people. Right. There's other photographs, but I will allude to them as we come to the actual stories, people of Earth. Right. The church and the university conducted parallel investigations. Both concluded that the remarkably lifelike portrait was a freak of nature, a natural formation in the mould which had burgeoned too slowly for any artist or prankster to have been involved. Public interest in this purportedly spontaneous portrait grew so strong that visitors over the ensuing 3 years sometimes queued to see it, creating disruption in the church's hallowed and normally quiet precincts. In its 11th of September 1926 edition, the London magazine Teepees and Castles Weekly described the picture thus: "It is a faithful and unmistakable likeness of the late Dean Liddell, who died in the year 1898. One does not need to call and play any imaginative faculty to reconstruct the head, to set perfectly straight upon the wall as it might have been drawn by the hand of a master artist. Yet it is not etched, neither is it sketched nor sculptured, but is there plain for all eyes to see." Here's a lino print drawing of excuse me. Alice melts into the looking glass in a Tenniel illustration from Lewis Carroll's book. The heroine's character was based on Alice Pleasance Liddell, daughter of Dean Liddell, who would eventually have his own rendezvous with the bizarre. 25 years after he died, the Dean's image mysteriously appeared on a wall of Christ Church Cathedral, Oxford, which I showed you previously. I wonder why he appeared 25 years after his death, why that was spiritually so important for him to manifest. I wonder if it had anything to do with a significant milestone with his daughter Alice. I don't know how old she was when he passed, but perhaps it was some significant event in her life that he and his wife were appearing in the mould. Very odd, isn't it? I'd be curious to know what was going on in her life at that exact same time. Just out of interest. Wonder how I could find out. After a tense series of meetings, ecclesiastical authorities agreed that the portrait, on balance, was doing Christ Church more harm than good. The mould image was scrubbed away. Several days later, the Dean's picture resurfaced. Excuse me. Pardon me. Workmen removed it again. 10 days passed. Then, in the precise spot which Dr. Liddell's image had occupied, a mould portrait of his wife, Lorena Liddell, emerged. Those two spirits were determined to make their presence known, or have everyone be reminded that they once lived there and worked there, and their history there. I find that very interesting. These events caused a furore in the press, especially when journalists discovered that Henry Liddell was not the first Dean posthumously to have appeared in a mould picture. The 8th of February, which happens to be also my mother's birthday, although she wasn't born till 25 years later. The 8th of February 1902 edition of the journal Notes and Queries had reported, after the death of the late Dean Vaughan of Llandaff, there suddenly appeared on the wall of Llandaff Cathedral a large blotch of dampness or minute fungi formed into a lifelike outline of the Dean's face. and in Christchurch itself the phenomenon began to proliferate. In October 1931, Mrs. Hewitt Mackenzie wrote that the beautifully clear image of the Dean had returned and that new mould pictures elsewhere in the church were also attracting attention. The most notable was on a grey pedestal base. About a foot from the floor, she wrote, a white patch appears on the marble containing a very clear likeness of an elderly man with bushy hair, full of whiskers and a beard. An even clearer face is to be seen on a wall behind the organ and within 20 yards of the choir stall. It is thought to be a chorister who sang in the church for many years. Earlier cases had been chronicled in the United States. On 20th of August 1870, the New York Herald described the experience of a man in Lawrence, Massachusetts, on one of whose window panes a perfectly executed portrait of a young woman appeared overnight. Hoping to rid himself of sightseers, the householder tried to erase the picture with a scrubbing brush. The portrait remained resolutely in place. On 18th of January 1871, the New York Times reported that likenesses of human faces, also defiant of scrubbing bristles, had mysteriously invaded window panes in Cincinnati. A century later, the still unexplained phenomenon was showing no sign of petering out. It's rather annoying, having dirty windows dirtied up by some kind of mould with faces of spirits all over the window. At least they haven't, touch wood, done that here, but they do appear in little golden lights in the hallway. That was a bit astonishing. But, that's the fairy folk showing me that they're protecting sacred space and Titania's realm. Probably protecting my assets a little bit too. Goodness knows, I wasn't actually praying for protection. I thought everything was going swimmingly, but the spirits know more than my normal, ordinary mortal ken sometimes, so I don't question it when they show their little faces in strange and unusual ways, like in the hall and golden reflections through the sun. If they're there, they're there. The house is peaceful and calm and quite lovely at the moment. Number 5, Rodriguez Acosta, Balmes, Spain, 23rd of August 1971. Morning. Maria Gomez Pereira took great pride in the whitewashed cottage she shared with her husband and son, owned by the Pereira family since it was built in 1835. The house was set high in the Andalusian mountains, its tiny windows offering exquisite glimpses of olive groves and densely treed slopes. Mrs. Pereira kept her house spotless. She was just distressed, therefore, when an ugly stain of unknown provenance appeared on her kitchen's cement floor. Nothing from hot soapy water to salt seemed powerful enough to remove the mark, and day by day it grew, spread. On the hot, still morning of 23rd of August, Mrs. Pereira bustled into her kitchen and saw to her alarm that the stain had transformed itself into what seemed to be the portrait of a face, a distorted male face, staring up at her. She was terrified. This morning and this moment would stay with her for the rest of her life. She ran to fetch her husband Juan and son Miguel. They would know what to do. But they were as frightened as her. They called on neighbours to see whether anyone could suggest an explanation. Excuse me. No one could. But 2 or 3 agreed that the picture did resemble Santa Faz, an icon displayed in the church, whose tower dominated the village. No one in the family would consider allowing so dreadful an image to remain in the house. Miguel Pereira smashed the cement with a pickaxe. His father hired a man to lay a new floor. Maria's kitchen was pristine again. Perhaps in time she could forget about the twisted face. But it was not to be. On 8th of September, the face reappeared in the newly laid concrete, just as the features of Dean Liddell, 48 years earlier, had grown again in the wall mould on Christchurch's south aisle. 2 priests visited the Pereira's cottage. They prayed for the family, but could offer no explanation for what was happening. Neighbours asked the mayor to help. He conferred with his fellow councillors, then sent in workmen instructed by an archaeologist to excavate the kitchen floor. Everyone hoped that the expert would somehow discover a cause for the past month's grotesque occurrences, and, arguably, he did. At a depth of 2.7 metres lay a jumble of skeletons, all headless. Imagine finding out you lived above that. That would creep me out, people of Earth. Also in the pit were thigh bones, rib cages, legs and arms, but there were no skulls anywhere. The archaeologists surmised that victims of ritual execution had been buried here, or that there had been a battle whose decapitated dead had been flung into a mass grave. I want to know where their skulls are. Curious minds want to know. Right. A laboratory tested the bones and declared them to have belonged to teenagers, male and female. They were about 7 centuries old. Meanwhile, an ecclesiastical historian produced records which showed that the Pereira's house, in common with its neighbours, had been built over an ancient graveyard. Most recently, in an historical sense, this cemetery had accommodated Christian dead. Before that, Muslims and Romans. Church authorities reburied the teenagers' remains in a nearby Catholic cemetery. The local council filled the excavation and covered the kitchen floor with its second fresh layer of cement. The mayor dared express the opinion that this might be the end of it, but his hopes were quickly dashed. Within a week, a veritable mass of new faces, many with expressions of anguish, began to appear in the cement. The images were accompanied by something new, representations of human hands, Greek and Latin crosses, and the claws of unidentifiable animals. The Pereiras were so distressed that local authorities closed their kitchen and built a new one at the rear of the house. This, to everyone's relief, remained image-free. But on the floor of the old kitchen, the pictures became more numerous by the day. As word spread, crowds of visitors arrived at the cottage, demanding to see the sinister display. The house eventually became one of the most celebrated addresses on earth, attracting TV news crews, photographers, and scientists of numerous disciplines. Kodak, in conjunction with Freiburg University, analysed photographs taken at the site and found them to be a genuine, unaltered record of the shifting, twisting images that were appearing constantly on the kitchen floor. Particularly disturbing to television audiences were those faces whose expressions drastically changed as the film rolled. The tourist frenzy gave no pleasure to the Spanish government. Authorities felt that the Balmes incident had got out of hand and was reflecting badly on modern Spain by presenting her as a superstitious and primitive society. Officials quietly invited scientific debunkers to visit the house and to provide rational explanations for the phenomena. The skeptics produced theories aplenty. The most popular was that the faces were an elaborate hoax created by a local artist who, with the family's collusion, slipped into the kitchen at night to paint images on the floor. The villagers reacted angrily to the suggestion. A local councillor, José Garcia, retorted, "I know the family well. They would not be capable of such deception." A photographic researcher, Dr. Antonio Arjona, concluded, "Trickery appears unlikely. The impressions are deep, unlike those surface representations which would be produced by a paintbrush. In addition, the images are expressive and closely related to each other. To produce such a fraud, it would be essential to have a team of good actors and even better artists. Also, those artists would require access to the kitchen, not only at night, but during the day, to produce the constantly changing pictures." Convinced that the images were a hoax nonetheless, the government placed a 24-hour guard on the cottage to prevent any rogue artist getting in. This measure's effect was opposite to what had been intended. Every morning, new faces were found on the floor. At the local governor's request, two prominent parapsychologists, Professor Germán de Argumosa and Professor Hans Bender, travelled to Valmes. The two men conducted a rigorous scientific experiment, watched by journalists and fellow scientists and filmed by television crews. They divided the kitchen floor into numbered sections, photographed each section, then covered it with a canvas sheet. Finally, in the presence of a notary, they sealed the kitchen's windows with wax. The 24-hour guard resumed. 3 months later, the professors recalled witnesses, the notary, and the TV crews, unsealed the kitchen and removed the canvas sheets. The result: the faces on the floor had moved and changed expression. Many new faces and symbols had appeared. Meticulously, the researchers now tested the muralled concrete itself. They found no trace of dye or paint, no evidence of X-rays, no chemical or organic traces, no radioactivity. Nowhere could they find any indication of how or through what process the teeming facescapes had been created. Professor Bender said, "This is, without doubt, the most important paranormal phenomenon of this century." Colleagues of Bender subsequently spent several weeks assessing Maria Pereira's relationship to the images. They noted that the faces seemed often to respond to her moods, mirroring the emotions that played across her features. During her absence for a month in hospital, the floor mural, although continuing to change its outlines, became muddy, the colours leaching away. The investigators concluded that Maria Pereira was unconsciously psychic, both influencing and being influenced by whatever was creating the pictures in her kitchen. When Juan Pereira died, the cement floor darkened, almost obscuring the images swarming there. Several months after Juan was buried, his face, to his widow's distress, appeared on the cement floor. It's almost acting like a black mirror, isn't it? Just reflecting the spirits' faces to her or whoever wants to look at them. Astonishing. For more than 3 decades, scores of scientific investigators have travelled to the Pereira's cottage, hoping to find an explanation for the enigma in its kitchen. All have failed. The Belmere's faces are as deep a mystery today as they were in 1971. And also, again, I'm curious as to what prompted that particular time frame, 1971, for them to all suddenly start manifesting and appearing in the concrete floor after, that graveyard being perhaps 700-800 years old. It's a bit astonishing, isn't it, that it should just suddenly manifest like that. Monks stare into Welsh farmhouse. In January 1999, religious words and pictures began to appear on the sitting room walls of 400-year-old Pennyford farmhouse in northern Wales. At first, the new owners, the Gower family, were confident There was a logical explanation. The walls are carved from old Welsh stone and covered with white plaster. Family assumed that workmen had written and drawn on the stone years before, and that the brown pigment was now slowly seeping through. This theory was scotched when additional words, crosses, and monk-like shapes began to appear in stains on the stone fireplace. As had happened at Balmez 28 years earlier, TV news crews descended on the cottage, whereupon events took an increasingly strange turn. The first word in the plaster had been Tangnefed, Tangnefedd. So I don't know if I pronounced that correctly because I don't speak Welsh or Gaelic, but anyway, it's a Welsh peace blessing. It was followed by Welsh expressions for love, joy, and hope. Well, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? If you're going to manifest the spirit, bring love, joy, and hope to the people. I mean, it's always a welcome thing, isn't it? Love, joy, and hope, and peace. Amen Vasila to that. But the next word, Meinich, monk, noticed in April 1999, appeared in more permanent form. It had been neatly carved into the hard stone at the top of the staircase and was chiselled close to a monk-shaped stain on the same wall. The chiselling continued, with crosses and monks appearing throughout the house and garden. The image of one monk was carved into a cherry tree, others in miniature form into small stones on a flower bed. The phenomenon invaded the Gower's computer. Friends began asking them to explain the meaning of emails containing such Welsh expressions as bendith, benediction. Many of these messages had been sent in the night, when the machine was switched off. The word storm intensified when visitors to the cottage began finding Tangnefedd, Minach, and Bendith embossed on their handbags and purses, and even, in one case, on a laptop computer. In 2004, Rosemary Gower took a snapshot of a framed print she had hung beneath the kitchen mirror. The resultant photograph shows crosses and white figures floating in the mirror's glass. The Gowers report that their cottage, disturbed though it is, has a friendly atmosphere. As they point out, every word on the walls wishes them well. They have no intention of leaving. Oh, blessed be, they've reached harmonic resonance with their, resident ghosts, which is very important. Like I say to my little spooks and fae and entities, as long as you live with me, don't scare me because I live alone, and don't jump into my friends and family when they visit, then we'll get along swimmingly. But if you misbehave, you have to be exorcised. Anyway, they've been very good. They were very good when Jared was here on Friday, and they were very well behaved when Lynn was here today. There was no naughtiness, I'm happy to report. So there you have it. Right, the next chapter, that's why there was that photo of Stalin, is called Was Stalin Poisoned to Prevent Nuclear War? Right, let us carry on, people of Earth. When Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin died of a brain hemorrhage in March 1953, Russia's newspapers mourned the passing of a great leader. Eulogists described Stalin as a genius, the saviour of the Russian people, and even as a god. His hallowed remains were laid in Lenin's Red Square tomb, and shuffling thousands queued to pay tearful respects. Not until 1956 did Nikita Khrushchev dare to announce that Stalin had in fact been a monster. Excuse me. It's a Coca-Cola. Responsible for the murder of 43 million Russians and the banishment to slavery of millions more. Understandably, Khrushchev failed to mention the rest of the story. Today, evidence is emerging that he and 3 frightened colleagues probably killed Stalin with rat poison to save their own lives and to prevent him from starting a nuclear war with the West. Stalin's Dasha near Moscow, 28th of February 1953, 11 p.m. The USSR's leader for life was in an expansive mood. He had been greatly amused by the comedy screened for him in the Kremlin's private cinema, and now, over a lavish banquet, he was enjoying the company of the Central Committee's 4 most senior members, Lavrentiy Beria, Georgy Malenkov, Nikita Khrushchev, and Nikolai Bulganin. As usual, Stalin dominated the conversation. The 4 stalwarts of his political inner circle responded occasionally, but for the most part sat smiling, nodding, and sipping their drinks. They were, however, listening with full attention. Stalin was feared among the political elite for his habit of asking sudden, searching questions. There were no brandies, liqueurs, or vodka on the table. The leader had decreed that this would be an evening for Mahari, a young grape wine, and quiet discourse. Behind the diners, on either side of the long table, stood the bodyguards, black holsters unclipped for instant response. One of them, Alexei Rybin, would in later years write a memoir, An Iron Soldier, that included a detailed description of events on this epochal evening. Unpublished and largely unnoticed, his revelations about one of the greatest turning points in world history would moulder for decades in Russia's Museum of the Revolution. An observer without the benefit of inside knowledge might have imagined that Stalin's beaming cronies were happy and carefree on this occasion, but in cold fact they were filled with dread. Each one of these ruthless and powerful men knew that he was in mortal danger, either of summary execution or of a more protracted death in a labour camp. The 4 colleagues had received reliable intimations that the leader was planning a purge of the Communist Party's Central Committee. So deep was Khrushchev's disquiet that he had dared to risk denunciation by consulting with his colleagues. To his relief, Beria, Malenkov and Bulganin had admitted that they shared his misgivings. Stalin's mind, the four agreed, had snapped. He was now a danger not only to the politicians around him, but to the entire Russian population and the world beyond. Lately, he had been privately making it clear that he wanted to provoke a nuclear conflict with the United States. Russia, impoverished and weak, could never hope to win such a war, if indeed anyone could win it. Stalin must not be allowed to take the first insane step toward Armageddon. He must die, and the fatal blow must be struck tonight. Rybin, in his memoir, recalls that the distinguished visitors remained at the table until 4 a.m. After they left, Stalin went to bed. Ivan Krustalev, a recently appointed guard, accompanied the dictator to his rooms and closed the door behind them. Later he summoned his colleagues. "Well, fellows," he said, "this is the first time ever, but the master, Stalin, has told me he won't need us tonight. He says we should all go to bed." To the wary security men, this was astonishing news. Stalin, ever paranoid about shadowy enemies who might strike at any moment, had always insisted on 24-hour surveillance. His guards were under strict orders not only to watch him, but to spy on each other. However, knowing how dangerous it could be to disobey any order the mercurial master might give, the guards repaired dutifully and gratefully to their lodge. At 10 the following morning they gathered in the kitchen to plan the day's activities. Surprisingly, the new man, Krustalev, had gone home. The chef was standing by as usual to serve breakfast the moment the master appeared. But by 11 a.m. there was still no sign of him. As midday passed, and then 1, 2 and 3 p.m, the guards grew worried, but none dared disturb Stalin. The penalty for waking him unnecessarily from sleep could be severe. At 6:30 that evening, one of the ground security staff rang to say a light had gone on in the leader's small private dining room. The deputy commandant, Pavel Lozgachev, said, "Thank God, everything's all right." For long hours more, the light continued to burn, but Stalin still did not appear. The timorous guards took no action. Just going to put on the air conditioning. Do you want to see the beautiful birthday card my friend Jared Nielsen made for me? He gifted me yesterday. And it's quite astonishing because I may be getting two birds, one an Indian ringneck and one a cockatiel. And here he has, without knowing, because this is a new development that I might be getting those birds, put a bird on the shoulder of this very handsome looking gentleman here. So it's quite quite prescient. Here's one he did for me before Charlie passed away, actually, and last year. Not sure what the occasion or what it was. I don't think this was a birthday card. No, I had a different birthday card from him last year. But anyway, that's my Charlie. So I'm going to get them framed and put them up somewhere in the house because they're quite lovely. He's a very talented man. His Instagram store is Selfie Sorcerer. So if you're interested in looking at perusing or perhaps purchasing some of his art, it's just very wonderful. Right, now, the timorous guards had taken no action. At 10 p.m, where did I put that? I've got to keep that with me. The remote for the aircon I'm talking about. Right. Whew. At 10 the following morning they get... No, we've read that. Where did I go? Oh, at 10 p.m, a messenger was delivered a parcel from the Central Committee. Knowing they could be punished if they failed to pass on mail promptly, the men argued among themselves over who should take it in. Pavel Loskachev lost the debate. 44 years later, in the June 1997 edition of the Russian magazine Sputnik, he described what happened next. I said, "All right then, wish me luck, boys," and headed off to the master's quarters. Normally we would go in there making some noise. He didn't like it if you came in quietly. You had to walk in with confidence, sure of yourself, but not stand too much to attention, or else he'd tell you off for imitating the good soldier Schweik. I opened the door and tramped loudly down the corridor. Then I looked into the small dining room and saw the master lying on the floor, his right hand outstretched. I froze. My arms and legs refused to obey me. I asked, "Comrade Stalin, what's wrong?" I saw that he'd wet himself. I said to him, "Should I call a doctor?" And in reply, he just mumbled, "Zh, zh," incoherently. Goodness. Loskachev noticed, lying on the floor, a copy of Pravda and a pocket watch which had stopped at 6:30. On the table stood an unopened bottle of mineral water. He assumed that Stalin must have walked from the bedroom to get it, switching on the light before he collapsed. In his book, Stalin, the Russian historian Edvard Radzinsky reproduces witnesses' accounts of the confusion that followed. Loskachev, terrified that he might make a wrong move, telephoned his immediate superior, Dasha Commandant Sharostin, who was on 2 days' leave. Sharostin rushed to the Dasha, inspected the snoring dictator, and recommended that he be lifted onto the sofa where he might be more comfortable. Then he rang KGB headquarters. The senior official who took the call, panicked and refused to accept any responsibility. He passed the buck by ordering Sharostin to ring Malenkov and Beria, two of Stalin's guests of the previous night. They would know what to do. Sharostin called Beria, whose sole contribution to the emergency was to say, "Don't tell anyone Comrade Stalin is ill." Hours passed. No one came to see the dying leader. Still snoring, his urine dripping from the sofa onto the carpet, Stalin lay surrounded by his nervous guards. Oh, what an inelegant death. Dying in your own urine. Yuck. Guess it happens to the best of us, though. In his memoirs, Nikita Khrushchev tells a very different and patently self-serving tale. Suddenly Malenkov phoned. "Look, the security boys have rung from Stalin's place. They are very worried. Something has happened to Stalin. I've already called Beria and Bulganin. You go straight there. I'm coming. They'll be along shortly." I immediately ordered my car. When I got there, I first dropped in at the guardhouse and asked, "What's happening?" They explained, "Usually by this time, 11 in the evening, Stalin has phoned us, ordered tea, but not this time." Khrushchev claims that he and his colleagues then hurried straight to the dasha. Remarkably, he continues, "When the guards told us something untoward had happened and that he was now asleep, we decided it would be a mistake to go in while he was in such an unseemly state. So we all went back home." For 13 hours, Joseph Stalin, supreme leader of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, lay in his own waste without medical help. Finally, and only after the desperate guards had telephoned him again, Khrushchev ordered 10 doctors to the dasha. But, as the guard Rybin recalls, they were too frightened to take decisive action. The practitioners simply milled uselessly around the snoring dictator, taking blood pressure, asking each other for prognoses, and hoping that someone else might have the courage to act. Jumpiest of all was the dentist attached to the group. Hands trembling, he removed the patient's plates, then accidentally dropped them to the floor. One doctor asked, Shouldn't Vinogradov, Stalin's personal physician, be here?" Deputy Commandant Lozgachev took the man aside and whispered, "That would be impossible. He was arrested last week." This was a time at which numerous medical specialists were being imprisoned for imagined plots against the regime. When it became officially apparent that the doctors were achieving nothing of value, the Soviet Academy of Sciences convened an emergency meeting. It voted to rush several of the nation's most distinguished specialists to Stalin's side. They arrived accompanied by an iron lung machine, but it was never used. As Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, subsequently revealed, that huge contraption just stood there idle while the specialists stared about wildly. Right. In 1972, an Academy member, Professor D. Myasnikov, looked back at the scene. Malenkov hurried in. He was sweating. He told us we must do all we could to prolong the patient's life. We all understood that time was needed to get the new government together and prepare public opinion. Stalin sometimes groaned. At one point, briefly, his conscious gaze seemed to go around the faces by the bed. Then Voroshilov, a member of the Central Committee Presidium, said, "Comrade Stalin, we, all your true friends and colleagues, are here. How are you feeling, dear friend?" But already Stalin's eyes were devoid of expression. We spent all the day injecting him and writing press releases. Politburo members walked up to the dying man. The lower ranks just looked through the door. I remember that Khrushchev was also by the door. At 9:50 p.m., the mass murderer, whose barbarism had rivaled Hitler's, sighed gutturally and died. In Russia and beyond, millions mourned. Legions of comfortable Western academics wrote essays, articles, and books lauding Stalin and the great good he had done for humankind. In bleak Siberian gulags and in the torture cells of the Lubyanka, even greater legions of victims allowed themselves to hope that their nightmare might soon end. What really happened to Stalin? Did he, as officially promulgated, die as a result of a stroke, or was he killed? Unless an autopsy is performed on his embalmed corpse, the truth will never be known. But an increasing number of Russian and Western historians lean to the view that Stalin was poisoned. The consensus among these scholars is that the new guard, Khrushchev, who sent his colleagues to bed after the banquet, was the likely assassin. Acting on orders from his master, KGB chief Lavrenti Beria, the guard is thought to have injected the sleeping dictator with the blood-thinning rat poison warfarin, a compound which can cause strokes and hemorrhages in humans. According to Professor Jonathan Brent of Yale's Russian History Department, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelmingly in favour of non-fortuitous death. And to support this further, we now have solid evidence of a cover-up at the highest level. In his book, Stalin's Last Crime, Professor Brent says Malenkov, Beria, Khrushchev and Bulganin would have been powerfully motivated to plot the death of their leader. Stalin had provided ample evidence that he was planning a second Great Terror in which he would kill hundreds of his colleagues along with tens of millions of other Russians. But, worst of all, Stalin had become dangerous enough to destroy the entire world. It wasn't simply that the four plotters were afraid for their own lives, and they were, says Brent, but it was the fear of a nuclear holocaust that drove them. A motivating force behind Stalin's ambition to destroy the West was his violent anti-Semitism. In 1947, only 2 years after the closure of Hitler's death camps, the Soviet leader had launched a vicious campaign against Russia's Jews, having them dismissed from university positions, humiliated, arrested, and executed. By 1953, the policy was careering out of control. Documents released after the USSR's collapse show that Stalin was spending hundreds of millions of rubles on equipment for new Siberian punishment camps in the Arctic North, Kazakhstan, and Siberia. Into these sub-zero prisons, the entire Jewish population, in company with other purported dissidents, would be herded. Relics of these mass jails, whose construction was abandoned after Stalin died, survive today. In Siberia and Kazakhstan, locals still point out the remains of the flimsy wooden huts in which hundreds of thousands of Jews were meant to live and prematurely die. Day by day, the USSR's captive press promoted policies of hatred. Under the headline Simpletons and Scoundrels, Pravda, 8th of February 1953, listed the names of scoundrels, Jews, to whom wrong-headed Russians, simpletons, were given employment. The article unleashed anti-Semitic hysteria. As on Nazi Germany's Kristallnacht, Jews were attacked on the streets and their shops smashed. But Stalin was pursuing an even more sinister agenda. He launched a new propaganda campaign designed to convince the Soviet people and world opinion that Jewish doctors, secretly backed by America, were conspiring to destroy the USSR by killing its leaders. An early victim of the so-called Jewish doctors plot was alleged to have been the senior Politburo member Andrei Zhdanov, who had died in 1948. The death had not been natural, Stalin insisted. Zhdanov's, excuse my pronunciation, Zhdanov's deliberately negligent Jewish specialists had killed him. To emphasize the magnitude of the danger facing the Soviet state, Stalin then announced that even his own personal physician, the long-serving and seemingly trustworthy Vinogradov, was involved in the conspiracy. The hapless doctor was arrested, sentenced, and sent to a labor camp. The Soviet public was scandalized. Rumors, deliberately spread, described how Jewish doctors were killing newborn Russian infants and injecting toddlers with diphtheria. What an evil thing to say. What evil slander that is. Anyway, let me just try and contain my rage a moment here. The purported doctor's plot caused outrage in the West. Patently, it was no more than an excuse for a second Holocaust. Diplomats tried desperately to persuade Stalin to reconsider his headlong policy, but he was adamant that the first in a series of physicians' trials, scheduled to begin on 15th of March 1953, would go ahead. Stalin died 10 days before the proceedings were scheduled. The Soviet government immediately dismissed all charges against the doctors. In the years that followed, people who had known Stalin came forward to say that he had hoped, by murdering hordes of Jewish physicians, to begin a nationwide pogrom that would provoke America to declare war on Russia. Using atomic weapons, this is a war we can win, he told confidants. Europe will fall to us, but only if we act now. In his book Stalin, Edvard Razinski records a conversation with the Dachau guard Pavel Loskachev. About a week before his death, Stalin mentioned the Jewish doctor's trial, which was due to start in a few weeks, then asked, "Will America attack us?" I replied that they wouldn't dare. This made him angry. Later on, he walked up to me and said, "They will attack us." I could see very clearly that he wanted that to happen. Such testimonies suggest that when Joseph Stalin died, either from natural causes or from the ravages of poison, he had been on the brink of fomenting the greatest disaster in the history of the world. Right, my darlings, thus concludes today's readings of even date. Just going to stop there. I'm quite tired now, and it's still my birthday. Happy birthday! And I'll come back tomorrow to read the next few chapters, however many chapters I wish to read to you tomorrow. So Goddess bless. Have a wonderful Passover, those of you who are celebrating, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend, everyone else. And yes, greetings and salutations from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. Bye for now. Shalom.